Good morning, everyone. From today onwards, we will start with the audiobook of M. Laxmikant's 6th edition. So, without wasting time, let's start with the chapter number 1 Historical Background. The British came to India in 1600 as traders in the form of East India Company, which had an exclusive rights of the trading in India under a charter granted by Queen Elizabeth I. In 1765, the company, which till now had purely trading functions, obtained the Diwani rights, that is, rights over revenue and civil justice of Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. This started its career as a territorial power. In 1858, in the wake of Sepoy Mutiny, the British Crown assumed direct responsibility for the governance of India. This rule continued until the India was granted independence on August 15, 1947. With independence came the need for the constitution. Hence, a constituent assembly was formed for this purpose in 1946, and on January 26, 1950, the constitution came into being. However, various features of Indian constitution and polity have their roots in the British rule. There were certain events in the British rule that laid down the legal framework for the organization and functioning of government and administration in British India. These events have greatly influenced our constitution and polity. They are explained here in a chronological order under two major headings. First, the company rule from 1773 to 1858, and second, the crown rule from 1858 to 1947. The company rule from 1773 to 1858. Regulating Act of 1773. This act was of great constitutional importance as it was the first step taken by British government to control and regulate the affairs of East India Company in India, and it recognized for the first time the political administrative functions of the company, and it laid the foundations of central administration in India. The features of this act were follows. First, it designated the Governor of Bengal as the Governor General of Bengal and created the Executive Council of 4 members to assist him. The first such Governor General was Lord Warren Hastings. Second, it made the Governor of Bombay, Madras presidencies subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal, unlike earlier when the three presidencies were independent of each another. Third, it provided for the establishment of Supreme Court in Calcutta in 1774, comprising one Chief Justice and 3 other judges. Fourth, it prohibited the servants of company from engaging in any private trade or accepting any present or bribes from the natives. Fifth, it strengthened the control of the British government over company by requiring the court of directors, that is governing body of the company, to report on its revenue, civil and military affairs in India. Amending Act of 1781. In a bid to rectify the defects of Regulating Act of 1773, the British Parliament passed the Amending Act of 1781, also known as the Act of Settlement. The features of this act were as follows. First, it exempted the Governor General and Council from the jurisdiction of Supreme Court for the acts done by them in their official capacity. Similarly, it also exempted the servants of company from the jurisdiction of Supreme Court for their official actions. Second, it excluded the revenue matters and the matters arising in the collection of revenue from jurisdiction of Supreme Court. Third, it provided that the Supreme Court was to have jurisdiction all over the inhabitants of Calcutta. It also required the court to administer the personal law of defendants, that is, Hindus, were to be tried according to the Hindu law and Muslims were to be tried according to Mohammedan law. Fourth, it laid down that the appeals from the provincial court could be taken to the Governor General in Council and not to the Supreme Court. Fifth, it empowered the Governor General in Council to frame the regulations for the provincial courts and councils. Pitt's India Act 1784. Pitt's India Act 1784. The next important act was the Pitt's India Act of 1784. The features of this act were as follows. First, it distinguished between commercial and political functions of the company. Second, it allowed the Court of Directors to manage commercial affairs but created a new body called Board of Control to manage the political affairs. Thus, it established the system of double government. Third, it empowered the Board of Control to supervise and direct all the operations of civil and military government or the revenues of the British possessions in India. Thus, the act was significant for two reasons. First, the company territories in India were for the first time called the British possessions in India, and second, the British government was given a supreme control over the company's affairs and its administration in India. Act of 1786. In 1786, Lord Cornwallis was appointed as the Governor General of Bengal. He placed two demands to accept this post, which are: first, he should be given the power to override the decision of his council in the special cases, and second, he would be the Commander in Chief. According to the Act of 1786, was enabled to make both the provisions. Charter Act of 1793. The features of this act were as follows. It extended the overriding power given to the Lord Cornwallis over his council to all future governors generals and governors of presidencies. Second, it gave the Governor General more power and control over the governments of the subordinate presidencies of Bombay and Madras. Third, it extended the trade monopoly of the company in India for another period of 20 years. Fourth, it provided that Commander-in-Chief was not be a member of the Governor General's Council unless he was so appointed. Fifth, it laid down the members of Board of Control and their staff were henceforth to be paid out of Indian revenues. Charter Act of 1813. The features of this act were as follows. It abolished the trade monopoly of the company in India, that is, the Indian trade was thrown open to all British merchants. However, it continued the monopoly of company over the trade in tea and trade with China. Second, it asserted the sovereignty of British Crown over the company's territories in India. Third, it allowed the Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of enlightening the people. Fourth, it provided for the spread of Western education among the inhabitants of the British territories in India. And fifth, it authorizes the local government in India to impose taxes on persons. They could also be punished the persons for not paying the taxes. Charter of Charter Act of 1833. This act was the final step towards centralization in the British India. The features of this act were as follows. First, it made the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India and vested him with all civil and military powers. Thus, the act created for the first time Government of India having authority over the entire territorial area of possessed by the British in India. Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. Second, it deprived the Governor of Bombay and Madras of their legislative powers. The Governor General of India was given the exclusive legislative powers for the entire British India. The laws made under the previous acts were called as regulations, while the laws made under this act were called acts. Third, it ended the activities of East India Company as a commercial body, which became purely administrative body. It provided that the company's territories in India were held by in trust for His Majesty, his heirs and successors. Fourth, the Charter Act of 1833 attempted to introduce the system of open competition for the selection of civil servants and stated that the Indians should not be debarred from holding any place, office, and employment under the company. However, this provision was negated after the opposition from the Court of Directors. Charter Act of 1853. This was the last series of Charter Acts passed by the British Parliament between 1793 to 1853. It was a significant constitutional landmark. The features of this act were as follows. First, it separated for the first time the legislative and executive functions of the Governor General's Council. It provided for the addition of 6 new members called legislative councillors to the council. In other words, it established a separate Governor General's Legislative Council which came to be known as Indian Central Legislative Council. This legislative wing of the council functioned as a mini parliament, adopting the same procedures as the British Parliament. Thus, the legislation for the first time was treated as a special function of the government, requiring special machinery as a special process. Second, it introduced an open competition system for the selection of recruitment of civil servants. The covenanted civil services was thus thrown open to Indians also. Accordingly, the Macaulay Committee, that is, the Committee of Indian Civil Service, was appointed in 1854. Third, it extended the company's rule and allowed it to retain the possessions of Indian territories on the trust for British Crown. But it did not specify any particular period, unlike the previous chapters. This was a clear indication that company rule could be terminated at any point of time the parliament liked. Fourth, it introduced for the first time the local representation of Indian Central Legislative Council. Of the 6 new legislative members of Governor General's Council, 4 members were appointed by the local, that is, provincial governments of Madras, Bombay, Bengal, and Agra. The Crown Rule 1858 to 1947. The Government of India Act of 1858. This significant act was enacted in the wake of revolt of 1857, which is also known as the First War of Independence or Sepoy Mutiny. The act known as the Act for Good Government of India. It abolished the East India Company and transferred the powers of government, territories, and the revenues to the British Crown. The features of this act were as follows. It provided that the India henceforth was to be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty. It changed the designation of Governor General of India to that of the Viceroy of India. He was the direct representative of the British Crown in India. Lord Canning thus became the first Viceroy of India. Second, it ended the system of double government by abolishing the Board of Control and the Court of Directors. Third, it created a new office, Secretary of State for India, vested with the complete authority and control over the Indian administration. The Secretary of State was a member of the British Cabinet and was responsible ultimately to the British Parliament. It established a 15-member Council of India to assist the Secretary of State for India. The Council was an advisory body. The Secretary of State was made the chairman of the Council. Fifth, it constituted the Secretary of State in Council as a body corporate, capable of suing and being sued in India and in the England. The Act of 1858 was, however, largely confined to the improvement of administrative machinery, by which the Indian government was to be supervised and controlled in England. It did not alter in any substantial way the system of government that prevailed in India. Indian Councils Act of 1861. After the Great Revolt of 1857, the British government felt the necessity of seeking the cooperation of Indians in the administration of their country. In pursuance of his policy of the association, three acts were enacted by the British Parliament in 1861, 1892, and 1909. The Indian Councils Act of 1861 is an important landmark in the constitutional and political history of India. The features of this act were as follows. First, it made the beginning of representative institutions by associating Indians with the lawmaking process. It thus provided the Viceroy should nominate some Indians as non-official members of his expanded council. In 1862, Lord Canning, the then Viceroy, nominated three Indians to his legislative council: the Raja of Banaras, Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Rao. It established the process of decentralization by restoring the legislative powers of Bombay and Madras presidencies. It thus reversed the centralizing tendency that started in the Regulating Act of 1773 and reached to its climax under the Charter of 1833. This policy of legislative devolution resulted into the grant of almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. Third, it also provided for the establishment of new legislative councils for Bengal, northwestern provinces, Punjab, which were established in 1862, 1886, and 1897 respectively. Fourth, it empowered the Viceroy to make rules and orders for the more convenient transaction of business in the Council. It also gave the recognition to the portfolio system. it introduced by the Lord Canning in 1859. Under this, a member of Viceroy's Council was made in charge of one or more departments of government and was authorized to issue the final orders on behalf of Council on the matters of his departments. Fifth, it empowered the Viceroy to issue ordinances without the concurrence of Legislative Council during an emergency. The life of such ordinance was 6 months. Indian Councils Act of 1892. The features of this act were as follows. First, it increased the number of additional, that is, non official members in the central and provincial legislative council, but it maintained the official majority in them. Second, it increased the functions of legislative council and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing the questions to the executive. Third, it provided for the nomination of some non-official members of first, a central legislative council by Viceroy on the recommendations of provincial legislative councils and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, and second, at the provincial Bengal Chamber of at the provincial legislative councils by the governors on the recommendation of the district boards, municipalities, universities, trade associations, zamindars, and chambers. The Act made a limited and indirect provision for the use of election in filling up some of the non-official seats, both in the central and provincial legislative council. The word election was not used in this act. The process was described as the nomination made on the recommendation of certain bodies. Indian Councils Act of 1909. This act is also called as Morley-Minto Reforms. Lord Morley was the then Secretary of State for India and Lord Minto was the then Viceroy of India. The features of this act were as follows. First, it considerably increased the size of legislative council, both central and provincial. The number of members in the legislative council was raised from 16 to 60. The number of members in the provincial legislative council was not uniform. It retained the official majority in the Central Legislative Council but allowed the Provincial Legislative Council to have non-official majority. Third, it enlarged the deliberative function of the legislative councils and both at the levels. For example, the members were allowed to ask supplementary questions, move resolutions on the budget, and so on. It provided for the first time the association for Indians with the Executive Council of Viceroy and Governors. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join Viceroy's Executive Council. He was appointed as the law member. It introduced the system of communal representation for the Muslims by accepting the concept of separate electorate. Under this, Muslim members were to be elected only by the Muslim voters. Thus, the act legalized the communalism, and Lord Minto came to be known as father of communal electorate. Sixth, it also provided for the separate representation of presidency, corporations, chambers of commerce, universities, and zamindars. Government of India Act 1919. On August 20, 1917, the British government declared for the first time that its objective was gradual introduction of responsible government in India. The Government of India Act in 1919 was thus enacted, which came into the force in 1921. This act is also known as Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms. Montagu was the Secretary of State for the India and Lord Chelmsford was the Viceroy of India. The features of this act were as follows. It relaxed the central control over the provinces by demarcating and separating the central and provincial subjects. The central and provincial legislatures were authorized to make laws on their respective list of subjects. However, the structure of government continued to be the centralized and unitary. Second, it further divided the provincial subjects into the two parts, transferred and reserved. The transferred subjects were to be administered by the governor with the aid of ministers responsible to the legislative council. The reserved subjects, on other hand, were to be administered by the governor and his executive council without being responsible to the legislative council. This dual scheme of governance was known as diarchy, a term derived from the Greek word diarch, which means double rule. However, this experiment was largely unsuccessful. Third, it introduced for the first time bicameralism and direct elections in the country. Thus, the Indian Legislative Council was replaced by bicameral legislature consisting of an upper house council of the state and lower house, that is legislative assembly. The majority of the members of both the houses were chosen by direct election. Fourth, it required that three of the six members of the Viceroy's Executive Council, other than Commander in Chief, were to be Indian. Fifth, it extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for the Sikh, Indian Christian, Anglo Indians, and Europeans. Sixth, it granted the franchise to the limited number of people on the basis of property, tax, or education. It created a new office of the High Commissioner for India in London and transferred to him some of the functions hitherto performed by the Secretary of State. Eighth, it provided for the establishment of Public Service Commission. Hence, the Central Public Service Commission was set up in 1926 for resulting the civil servants. 9. It separated for the first time the provincial budgets from the central budget and authorized provincial legislature to enact their budgets. 10th, it provided for the appointment of statutory commission to inquire into and report on its working after the 10 years of its coming into the force. Simon Commission. In November 1927 itself, that is 2 years before the schedule, the British government announced the appointment of 7-member statutory commission under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon to report on the condition of the India under new constitution. On the members of commissions were British and hence all parties boycotted the commission. The commission submitted its report in 1930 and recommended the abolition of diarchy, extension of responsible government in provinces, establishment of federation of British India and princely states, continuation of communal electorate, and so on. To consider these proposals of commission, British government convened 3 round-table conferences for the representatives of British government, British India and Indian princely states. On the basis of this discussion, a white paper on constitutional reforms was prepared and submitted for the consideration of the Joint Select Committee of the British Parliament. The recommendations of this committee were incorporated with the certain changes in the next Government of India Act in 1935. Communal Award. In August 1932, Ramsay MacDonald, the British Prime Minister, announced the scheme for representation of minorities, which came to be known as Communal Award. The award not only continued the separate electorates for Muslims, Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo Indians, and Europeans, but also extended it to the depressed class, that is, scheduled caste. Gandhiji was distressed over this extension of principles of the communal representation to the depressed class and undertook the fast unto death in Erwada jail in Pune to get the award modified. At last, there was an agreement between the leaders of the Congress and the depressed classes. The agreement, known as the Pune Pact, it retained the Hindu joint electorate and gave reserved seats to the depressed classes. Government of India Act 1935. The act marked a second milestone to a completely responsible government of India. It was a lengthy and detailed document having 321 sections and 10 schedules. The features of this act were as follows. It provided for the establishment of All India Federation consisting of the provinces and the princely states as units. The act divided powers between the central and the units in the terms of three lists. First, federal list, which is for center with the 59 items. Second, the provincial list for the provinces with the 54 items, and concurrent list for both with 36 items. Residuary power were given to the viceroy. However, the federation never came into being as the princely states did not join it. Second, it abolished the diarchy in the provinces and introduced the provincial autonomy in the place. The provinces were to be allowed to act as an autonomous institution until the administration in their defined spheres. Moreover, the Act introduced in the responsible governments in the provinces. That is, the governor was required to act with the advice of the ministers responsible for the provincial legislators. This came into being effect in the 1937 and was discontinued after 1939. Third, it provided for the adoption of diarchy at the center. Consequently, the federal subjects were divided into the reserved subjects and transferred subjects. However, this provision of the Act was not come into the operation at all. Fourth, it introduced the bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces. Thus, the legislature of Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, and Assam, and the United Provinces were made of bicameral consisting of the legislative councils, which is upper house, and the legislative assembly, which is lower house. However, many of the restrictions was placed on them. Fifth, it further extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorate to the depressed classes, that is scheduled caste women and the workers. Sixth, it abolished Sixth, it abolished the Council of India and established by the Government of India Act 1858. Secretary of the State for India was provided with the team advisors. Seventh, it extended the franchise about 10% of the total population got into voting rights. It provide Eighth, it provided for the establishment of a remark Bank of India to provide the currency and credit of the country. Ninth, it provided for the establishment of not only Federal Public Service Commission but also make a Financial Service Commission but also a provincial public service commission and joint public service commission for the two or more provinces. 10th, it provided for the establishment of federal court which was set up in 1937. Indian Independence Act of 1947. On February 20, 1947, the British India Prime Minister Clement Attlee declared that the British rule on India ended by June 30, 1948, and after which the power could be transferred to the responsible Indian hands. The announcement was followed by the adoption of the Muslim League demanding the partition of the country. Again, in June 3, 1947, the British government made it clear that any constitution framed by the Constituent Assembly formed in 1946 cannot apply those parts of Constituent Assembly of India which were unwilling to accept on it. On the same day, June 3, 1947, the Lord Mountbatten, the Viceroy of India, put forth the partition plan, which is called as the Mountbatten Plan. The plan was accepted by Congress and Muslim League. The plan, immediate effects of the plan was given to the plan enacting the Indian Independence Act of 1947. The features of this act were as follows. It ended the British rule in India and declared India as an independent and sovereign state from August 15, 1947. It provided for the partition of India, creation of two independent dominions of India and Pakistan with the right to secede from the British Commonwealth. Third, it established the office of Viceroy created for each dominion as a Governor General, who was to be appointed by the British King on the advice of the domination of Cabinet. His Majesty's government in Britain was to have no responsibility with respect to the government of India and the Pakistan. Fourth, it empowered the constituent assemblies and had two dominions to frame and adopt the consultation of their respective nations and to repeal any act of British. Fifth, it empowered the constituent assembly of both the dominions to legislate for their respective territories till the new constitution were drafted and enforced. No act of British Parliament was passed after August 15, 1947 was to extend either of the new dominions unless it was extended by hitherto by a law of legislation of dominion. It abolished the office of Secretary of State for the Commonwealth States. Seventh, it proclaimed the lapse of British paramountcy over the Indian princely states and the states and treaty relations with the tribal areas from August 15, 1947. It granted the freedom to the Indian princely state either to join the Dominion of India or to the joint dominant of Pakistan. Or to remain independent. Ninth, it provided the government of India of each other the dominions and the new provinces by the Government of India Act of 1935 till the New constitutions were framed. The dominions were whoever authorized to make the modifications in this act. 10th, it deprived the British monarch of right to veto bills, ask for the reservation of central certain bills for the Governor General. The Governor General and would have a very faulty. Sorry, it deprived the British monarch to right of the veto bills or ask for the reservation of certain bills for his approval, but the right was reserved for the Governor General. The Governor General would have full power to assent any bill in his name, Majesty. 11th, it designated the Governor General of India and provincial governors of the constitutional, that is nominal heads of the provincial governors, heads of the states. They were made to act the advice of the respective council of ministers in their matters. 12th, it dropped the line of Emperor of India from the title of royal titles of the King of England. The discontinued sorry it discontinued the appointment to the civil services and reservation of posts by the Secretary of States in India. The members of the civil service appointed before the August 15, 1947 would continue to enjoy all the benefits that they were entitled to till the last time. At the stroke of midnight of 14 to 15 August 1947, the British rule came to an end and power was transferred to the new independent dominions of India, Pakistan. Lord Mountbatten, who became the first Governor General of New Dominion of India, he swore in the Nehru as the first Prime Minister of independent India. The Constituent Assembly of India formed in 1946 because of the Parliament of the Indian Dominion. Table number 1.1, Interim Government 1946. First, we will see the members and then the portfolio held. Jawaharlal Nehru held Vice President of Council, External Affairs and Commonwealth Relations. Second, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Home, Information and Broadcasting. Third, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Food and Agriculture. Agriculture. Sorry, just a minute. Third, Dr. John Mathai, Industries and Supplies. Fifth, Jagjivan Ram, Labor. Sixth, Sardar Baldev Singh, Defense. Seventh, C. H. Bhabha, Works, Mines and Power. Eighth, Liaquat Ali Khan, Finance. Ninth, Abdul Rahim Nishtahar, Pustos and Air. Ninth, Abdul Rab Nishtar, Finance, Roads and Posts and Air. Asaf Ali, Railways and Transport. C. Rajgopalachari, Education of Arts. 12. The Chandigarh I. Chandigarh, Commerce Ministry. 13th, Ghazanfar Ali Khan, Commerce. And 15, the Joginder Shah Mustaqwala. Sorry, Jo, Gazab, Ghazanfar Ali Khan, Health. And 14th, Joginder Nath, Law Mandal. Note: the government of interim government were the members of the Victory Viceroy's Executive Council. The Viceroys continued to be the head of council, but the Jawaharlal Nehru was deliberating in the each another. तो त्याला Table number 2. The first cabinet of Free India. Members and portfolio heads. Jawaharlal Nehru, Prime Minister, External Affairs and Commonwealth Relations, Scientific Research. Second, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Home, Information and Broadcasting, State. Third, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Food and Agriculture. Fourth, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Education. Fifth, Dr. John Mathai, Railways and Transport. Sixth, R. K. Shanmukham Chetty, Finance. Seventh, Dr. B. R. Ambedkar, that is Law. 8. Jagjivan Ram, Labor. 9th, Sardar Vallabhdev Singh, Defense. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, Health. C. H. Bhabha, Commerce. 12th, Rafi Ahmad Kidwai, Communication. 13th, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, Industries and Supplies. 14th, V. N. Gadgil, Works, Miners and Powers. Thank you. Now we have completed with the audiobook of the Laxmikant, chapter number 1. Tomorrow we will meet with the new chapter. Thank you. And please do not forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. And if you want more such audiobooks for different books which is required for UPSC, let me know in the comment sections, and please subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Have a good day.